Good morning, this is day 46, I think. We're not going to look at a biblical book today. We're going to do something slightly different. As you know, I hope we finished the Old Testament yesterday, and tomorrow we're going to start the New Testament. Now, the curtain of the Old Testament drops with the prophet Malachi, who is the last as well as the latest. You know, I said that the minor prophets aren't all in chronological order, but Malachi is almost certainly the last Old Testament book to be written. So the curtain falls there, with the Persian Empire governing the tiny little re-emergent people of Judah, and the curtain for the New Testament rises with the Roman Empire in full force, governing the nation of Israel. And effectively John the Baptist, we get the birth narratives, but that kind of the curtain rises really with John the Baptist there. So what has happened to take us from Malachi giving a prophetic word to the people of Israel under Persian rule to John the Baptist appearing and preaching under Roman rule? How have we got from A to B? So I thought it might be useful to have a short and very abbreviated and oversimplified history of this time. So I want to plot some of the great political events that are taking place that affect the nation of Israel at this time, and also talk a little bit about how Judaism develops in this period as well, because Judaism has also changed quite a lot in this period. This is all going to be very simplified, but I'm just trying to sketch the broad brushstrokes. Okay, so the Old Testament curtain falls on the Persian Empire, as I mentioned. Now, the Persians are defeated by Alexander the Great. So Alexander's father, Philip of Macedonia, has united the various Greek states, which you may know about, like Troy and Sparta and so on, has united those states. And then his son, Alexander the Great, is an extraordinary military commander. And in just 3 years, he defeats the entire Persian Empire and establishes what is effectively a Greek empire. Now, he dies young, and he dies without an heir and without any succession planning. And his generals then enter into a kind of period of I don't know if civil war quite expresses it, but there is a real power struggle between his generals to try and take control of what had been his empire. And no one wholly succeeds in taking control of his empire. And there were various, it's kind of carved up between them, really. There are two major dynasties that we need to pay attention to because they affect what happens to Israel. So there's the dynasty that is begun by the general whose name was Ptolemy, which begins with a P, Ptolemy. So Ptolemy the First starts a dynasty whose capital is in Alexandria in Egypt. So that's one empire, if you like, and that was founded in 323 BCE. And then the other major general that we need to pay attention to was called Seleucus. And he establishes an empire which has the capital in Antioch. So we've got the Ptolemies based in Alexandria and the Seleucids based in Antioch. Now, Judea, which is what the territory that we've been concerned about and the people group that we've been thinking about, that's what they're now called, is Judea. And they are under the reign of the Ptolemies from 323 BCE until 198 BCE, so for over 100 years. But then the Seleucids defeat the Ptolemies at a great battle at what is later known as Caesarea Philippi. So if you know your New Testament refers to a place called Caesarea Philippi. At that place, which has another name in those days, the Seleucids defeat the Ptolemies, and at that point Judea then comes under Seleucid rule. Hope this is making sense so far. So for approximately 50 years, Judea is under the rule of the Seleucids. Now, what was life like under the Seleucids? Well, initially they had quite a lot of autonomy. The Seleucid kings put a high priest allowed a descendant of Zadok. So Zadok was a high priest who had been consecrated in the time of Solomon, hundreds of years previously. And a descendant of Zadok was given the high priesthood by the Seleucid kings. And the Zadokites continued to be high priests during this period, for a while anyway. And the high priests in these days were governing, as well as they had kind of civic responsibility as well as religious responsibility. So it's a very powerful position. Now, not long after the Seleucids took enough control that they took over Judea, they lost a major battle to the emerging nation of Rome, the emerging Republic of Rome. And as a result, they had to pay heavy annual tribute to Rome, and this put them into financial hardship. Now, that matters because this destabilizes things in Judea, as I shall explain. Now, the king called Antiochus IV. Now, he is going to prove to be the most notorious Seleucid king, and he was very, very cruel. Let me just tell you a little bit about what happens in his time. So the high priest, the Zadokite high priest, is in charge, and his brother Jason rather fancies having that title for himself. So he offers a very substantial bribe to Antiochus, the Seleucid king, to be given the high priesthood instead of his brother. And probably because Antiochus is in such financial difficulty because of this tribute to Rome, he accepts the bribe and puts Jason in his place. Incidentally, the deposed high king strops off to Egypt and sets up a new temple there, which actually is operative for until through New Testament period, until roughly when the fall of the Jerusalem temple happens under Rome in AD 70. So there is this kind of alternative temple operative in Egypt in that time under the Zadokite high priests. But Jason is put in place in Jerusalem instead of his brother. However, a few years later, another man called Menelaus. Now, Menelaus is not a descendant of Zadok, and he quite fancies having a go at being high priest. So he offers another bribe to Antiochus, and Antiochus says, "Bring it on, I need the money." And so he accepts Menelaus's bribe and deposes Jason. So now we have a high priest who is not a descendant of Zadok, and this is problematic in the minds of many people. Now, Antiochus then he's engaging in conflict with Rome, and he loses another battle to Rome. And while his attention is focused on this other battle, many of the Judeans who are unhappy about Menelaus being their high priest, they take the opportunity to try and oust him. Antiochus returns his attention to Jerusalem and absolutely smashes down on it. He conquers it, he demolishes the walls of Jerusalem, he loots the temple in a dreadful, dreadful act that is termed the abomination that causes desolation. So he loots the temple, he takes a pig into the most holy place. So no one's allowed into the most holy place except the high priest once a year. And he sends people to take a pig into the most holy place. I'm not sure if he goes in himself personally. I've got a feeling he does actually, but I'm not sure. And they sacrifice a pig there. Now, a pig is an unclean animal. For anybody to go into the most holy place is abominable. To take a pig in is utterly abominable. And he establishes a cult of Zeus in the temple, and offers this pig there as part of this. Now, this is regarded as this just the most appalling desecration, and as a result, there is a lot of rebellion by a number of different groups that try and throw him out of Jerusalem. Now, this chap now takes on this title, this divine title of Theos Epiphanes, which means manifest God. And he writes this on his coinage. And he regards himself, or at least takes the claim, that he is Zeus manifest in the flesh. He is God incarnate. Of course, this is an utter blasphemy in the Jewish mind. And he's sometimes referred to as Antioch Epiphanes IV. So he's Antiochus IV, with this title he's taken, Theos Epiphanes. But you may have the language of Antioch Epiphanes IV. And he's terribly, terribly cruel. There are these rebellions against him, and he's really cruel. He tries to, not only has he demolished Jerusalem's walls and desecrated the temple, but he outlaws the practice of Judaism. And things like keeping the Jewish food laws, circumcising your children, your sons, or keeping the Sabbath are all forbidden and punishable by cruel death. And so he's dreadfully oppressing the people, and there are these rebellions that are trying to oust him, mostly unsuccessfully, until a particular family comes along. And this is the family called the Hasmoneans. There was a group of brothers called who are the Maccabeans. So the bigger family is called the Hasmoneans. And there are these families, there's this family, these brothers, I think it's 4 brothers, called the Maccabeans. And we've got Judas Maccabeus and his brothers. And they enter a period, or lead an episode of guerrilla warfare against Antiochus. And they succeed, and they actually manage to gain autonomy. It takes quite a long time. Judas loses his life. Most of them lose their life in the struggle. But Simon, one of the brothers, manages to finally gain autonomy for Judea. And Judea re-establishes itself as an independent nation with re-established worship of the true God. Great celebrations. There's a story around that I'll tell you in just a moment. Simon, who is one of these brothers, is appointed high priest forever, in inverted commas, by the people. They're so grateful to him for what he's done. And what that actually means in practice is that his descendants occupy the office of high priest for over 100 years. Now, when the temple is reclaimed, I'm in recording, please don't interrupt me. When the temple is reclaimed, they need to reconsecrate it, and because it's been polluted in this way. This is the story of the reconsecration of the temple. At least this is the traditional story. They ordered the temple to be cleansed, and a new altar was built in place of the polluted one, and they needed to consecrate new holy vessels and so on. Now you do that by means of pure olive oil, which has been consecrated as well. And when they went into the temple, they could only find enough olive oil. Sorry, they don't consecrate with the olive oil so much as they need the olive oil as part of the ritual, I think, and to burn the candles and so on, and the menorah. So they go into the temple and they find some consecrated olive oil, but only a little bit. There's only enough to burn the menorah for one night, and it's going to take 8 days to prepare a fresh supply of kosher oil for the menorah. And so they start to burn the menorah, expecting the oil to run out quite quickly. And miraculously, the menorah burns for 8 days while they are able to do the ritual for preparing and consecrating more olive oil. And in celebration of that miracle, the festival of Hanukkah was instituted, also known as the Festival of Lights. And of course, that is celebrated to this day. So that's the origin of the Festival of Lights. So Judea is independent for about 75 years under the Hasmonean dynasty. This is this Maccabeans, the family of Maccabeans. And in this time, in fact, they expand their territory, and they take, for example, the territory of Galilee and so on. However, things don't go well, because by 67 BCE, there is civil war among the Hasmoneans. And in particular, there are 2 different sides who are both struggling to take power. And both of them, this is deeply ironical, this part of the story, I think, both of them apply to the Roman general Pompey for help, to help them on their side. So Pompey needs no second invitation, and he intervenes. And initially, I think he intervenes by their consent, but there's an ongoing struggle for power, and eventually he forms a 3-month siege against Jerusalem, and occupies Jerusalem and conquers it. Jerusalem is now subject to the Roman Empire. And Pompey enters Jerusalem himself. He enters the temple, which he has no business doing, and he enters the Holy of Holies himself to prostrate himself there before the god. He may well have been well-meaning. The way the Romans viewed the religions of their conquered nations was quite benign in their own eyes. They were very happy for these conquered nations to continue with their own religions. They kind of just absorbed all these extra gods into their own pantheon, provided they were loyal to Rome. And we'll talk a bit more about that in days to come. So he may well have thought he was doing something good by going and worshipping the Jewish God in the Holy of Holies. Of course, it was viewed by the observant Jews as being utterly, utterly abhorrent. And when he is later assassinated in Egypt, 15 years later, it was regarded by many of the Jews as being divine judgment for that action. So Jerusalem and Judea is now under Roman rule. And a man called Antipater is appointed governor. Now, Antipater, you may have heard this name. You may be starting to think, yes, I know that name. You may well know actually of the second Antipater, but the first one is appointed governor, and he is assassinated. And then his sons, his two sons, Phasael, and here's a name you'll know, and Herod, are appointed as joint governors of his territory. Now, we've had so many different kind of people groups, haven't we, and nations and would-be empires and so on. We've got another one now, briefly, the Parthians who are attacking and trying to attack Rome. And Phasael is killed by the Parthians, who attack and briefly conquer Judea and Jerusalem. So we had Herod and Phasael, the sons of Antipater, who were co-rulers. Phasael's now being killed. He's been taken out of the picture. We just have Herod now. And Rome at this time is being governed by Antony and Octavian. And Antony and Octavian declare Herod to be the king of the Jews and basically say to him, I think, go and reconquer Jerusalem. So Herod does reconquer Jerusalem. It takes him about 3 years, but eventually he does. So now Herod is king of Judea under the Romans, under Antony and Octavian. Octavian, of course, there's going to be, within Rome itself, there's going to be another civil war, and Antony and Octavian are going to fight each other, and eventually Octavian is going to become emperor. He then takes the name Augustus, so this is the Emperor Augustus. So now we have the Emperor Augustus in Rome, and Herod, the King Herod, under him as king of Judea. And this is the first Herod. There were two Herods, well, there's more than two, but there were two important Herods. And this is Herod the Great. Now Herod reigns for 33 years. He is a builder. He rebuilds the Temple of Jerusalem, which, as you heard, has been severely battered in the many intervening years since it was rebuilt under Ezra. And he rebuilds it in this great vanity project, actually. It's enormous. If you've been there, you can still see some of those huge stones that were brought in to build it. How they got them there without modern lifting equipment is anybody's guess. It's extraordinary. So Herod's a builder, and you get the impression this is not an act of religious devotion so much as I say, a vanity project. Anyway, so Herod rebuilds the temple. Herod is extremely cruel, and he, to his own family, he's not a very faithful and observant Jew, and he kills 3 of his sons who were plotting against him, or at least he thought they were plotting against him. And the Emperor Augustus is reported to have said that he would rather be Herod's pig, who Herod would have, because he wasn't a very observant Jew, he didn't kind of despise pigs, perhaps. At least Augustus didn't think he did. He'd rather be Herod's pig than his son, because 3 of his sons got killed on Herod's instructions. So Herod reigns for 33 years, disposes of 3 of his sons in that time, and I think 2 of his wives, if I remember correctly. There's 5 wives in total, I think. He also deposes another of his sons who he thinks is plotting against him. So by the time he dies, there are 3 sons who are given the territory between them by Rome. So Herod has reigned this kind of larger Judea, if you like. It's quite a big area which extends up into part of modern Syria, part of modern Jordan, part of modern Lebanon, and I think down into whatever's south of, down further south than current Israel, as modern Israel as well. So quite a large area he has governed. That is divided up between his sons by Roman edict. So we've got 3 sons. We've got Antipater, Alexander. Oh, sorry, no, hang on, I'm getting mixed up. They were the ones who got killed. Right, we've got 3 sons who are alive. We've got Philip, known as Philip the Tetrarch, who is put in charge of the Decapolis. Now, this is mentioned in Luke. I've had the reference written down. I haven't got it in front of me now. I think it might be Luke 13. But Philip is mentioned there. So he is given this area, which is kind of the northeast of the Sea of Galilee, which now straddles part of Lebanon, part of Jordan, and the Golan Heights. So that's one of the sons. Next son, Herod Antipas. Herod Antipas is given the region of Galilee and the north of the country. And then Herod Archelaus. Now, Archelaus is given Samaria and Judea. He's given a large chunk of his father's territory. But he is a very cruel ruler. You may remember, now we're just getting into New Testament times now, because when Herod the Great tries to kill Jesus and kills all the babies in Bethlehem, and Joseph and Mary flee with the infant Jesus to Egypt. You remember this story? After a couple of years, Joseph tries to bring the family back, and as he approaches, he hears that Archelaus is now king, is now governing this territory, and he's so alarmed by this that he then takes the family up north to Nazareth under Herod Antipas's rule. So Archelaus is very cruel and governs very badly, and eventually is deposed by Rome. Rome won't have it because there are rebellions against him, and they don't want this political instability. And so they depose Archelaus, and they put a Roman procurator in his place, and that man's name is Pontius Pilate, and he comes to govern in 6 AD, and of course he is still there when Jesus is tried and executed. That has taken us politically from the time of Malachi and the Persians up to the time of the Roman Empire. Just very briefly, in 2 or 3 minutes, I want to just cover the major developments of Judaism in this time. So in this period, the Old Testament really reaches its final form. There's quite a lot of editing going on in this, what's known as this intertestamental period. It's also translated into Greek. So in Alexandria, remember we said there were 2 seats of power early on. There was the Antioch and Alexandria. And in Alexandria, the Hebrew Bible is translated into Greek, and this is known as the Septuagint, sometimes abbreviated to LXX, which of course is 70 in Roman numerals. And the legend around the translation of the Septuagint, nobody knows quite how true this is. I think it's slightly fanciful, but anyway, the legend is that Ptolemy II commissioned the translation of the Hebrew Bible, first the Torah and then the rest of it, by 70 Jewish scholars, and they all got on with it quietly, independently, and then miraculously they all produced identical translations. So I think a little fanciful, but nonetheless, the emergence of the Septuagint at this time, this Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, is a very important step. And actually, by the time of Jesus, we think that most of the Jews would have been listening to and reading their Bible in the Greek and not in the Hebrew. We're not positive about that, but I think most people think that that's the case. Around this time as well, we get the beginnings of synagogue worship. So up until now, really, the only place you could worship in an official capacity was in the shrine in the Temple of Jerusalem. But there's now a wide Jewish diaspora. We've got Jews in Alexandria and in Antioch and all over the place. And they can't all travel to the temple all the time to worship. And so we're starting to get the emergence of synagogue worship. So there's no sacrifice taking place in the synagogue. Sacrifice takes place in the temple. But the synagogue is a place where the Torah is read, where people gather to sing and pray. We also get emergence of various Jewish sects. And I'll talk more about these in times to come as we kind of bump into them in all the things that are relevant to them in the New Testament. One of the important ones was the Essenes, who are operating on the banks of the Dead Sea. And it is the Essenes, we think, or a sect very like them, that had the Dead Sea Scrolls, that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls and hid them away, which were not found until the middle of the last century. We also get a lot of other writings taking place at this time, and these writings some of them are in what's known as the Apocrypha, which is a collection of writings which certain groups of Christians hold as being part of their Bible. Protestant Christians don't, but you may have an Apocrypha in your Bible if you have a look at it. So I would regard these books as useful but not scripture. And also a lot of, or part of the Apocrypha, but also beyond the Apocrypha, a whole load of writings falling into the apocalyptic style of writing. Now, I've spoken about apocalyptic when we looked at Daniel and when we looked at Ezekiel and in one or two other places. We're going to talk about it again when we get to Revelation. But I'm going to just close this out now by reading you just a few lines from the apocryphal book of Enoch. And if you know the book of Revelation, this will sound quite familiar. So this is just to give you a flavour of what apocalyptic writings that aren't in the Bible sound like. So this is from Enoch. And just before I say that, apocalyptic writings, I said before, but I'll just say it again. They are mainly written in a time of great persecution. And they are written to help a persecuted people understand the greater spiritual reality of what is going on. They are to give hope and courage to a people who are persecuted. And this is why we get a flourishing of them in this period, because of the intense persecution under Antiochus, as I outlined a few moments ago. So here are these words from Enoch. And it came to pass after this that my spirit was translated, and it ascended into the heavens. And I saw the holy sons of God. They were stepping on flames of fire. Their garments were white, and their faces shone like snow. And I saw two streams of fire, and the light of that fire shone like hyacinth. And I fell on my face before the Lord of spirits. And the angel Michael seized me by the right hand and lifted me up and led me forth into all the secrets. And he showed me all the secrets of righteousness. That's from the prophet Enoch, not part of the Bible, but a similar style of writing to Daniel and Revelation. I'll see you tomorrow, and we're going to begin our New Testament journey with, of course, the Gospel of Matthew.